Hello and welcome to KegThat's YouTube channel. Today I want to show you how you can make a sour beer in about a week. Yes, you can make one that quickly, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about how to make a sour beer, whether it's safe or not, but it's going to be perfectly fine. I know that there are stories that if you make a sour beer you're going to have to throw out all your equipment. The bugs, they just don't leave your brewery, they move in, they invite all their friends and family, and before you know it you've got all this bacteria living in your children's rooms and taking over your house, and you're just going to have to move out because the bacteria have taken over. Well, it's not quite like that. There are quite a few bugs that go into making different types of sour beer, and one of them, one very common one, is Lactobacillus. And Lactobacillus is a bacteria. It's used in yogurt production. It's used in making lacto-fermented pickles. So when you get brined pickles, that's got Lactobacillus in it. And it's also used in making certain types of sour beer. If you've ever made a kettle sour before, that's where you do a mash, it comes to the boil, and you hold it there for about 24 to 48 hours at 40 degrees with some kind of lactobacillus in there, and that will get a sourness to the beer, and then you boil it and it kills off the lactobacillus. When you use lacto cold side, it's not risky. The type of lacto that makes beer go sour is pretty easy to get rid of. So one of the reasons hops were used is because it's a suppressant of lactobacillus. It prevents it growing and taking over. Also, sanitizers like Chemsan, they are designed to kill lactobacillus. So you're okay with that. It's just when you start to use other bugs like Brettanomyces and Pediococcus, that can be a bit more problematic, but we're not going to be using that. So how do you get a sour beer so fast? Because another thing that people say is when you have sour beers, they need to age for 6 months to a year. Lacto actually works really quickly. It sours in 3-4 days or so. Again, it's Brettanomyces and Pediococcus, which both take quite a long time to ferment and to create the flavours that you want in sour beers and wild ales. As mentioned, we're just using lacto, so how are we going to get it done so quickly? Well, we're using our good friend kveik. And I'm using Ebbegarden. Ebbegarden is one of my favourite kveik types. It's about 5 strains of Saccharomyces and several strains of Lactobacillus, and what it does is it makes a tropical sour beer. It takes about 5 days to ferment at 35 degrees or so, and with that you get really nice like overripe mango, papaya, pineapple, and like a really nice clean lactic sourness. It's actually a very easy and a very cheap way of making a really good quality sour beer. I've made it before a few times and it just comes out really well. So as I mentioned, hops are a suppressant to lactobacillus. So what will this recipe look like? Well, we're not going to use hops. Yes, I know that there are loads of hop heads out there who they brew just so they can get hands on loads of different hops, but actually you don't need it and it's still going to be very, very tropical. What I would recommend doing is make this recipe, and I've got a link below to the recipe pack, and because there aren't any hops, it's usually a bit cheaper to make than your average batch of beer. And then what I would do, if you really like this beer, is to experiment around. So you can make the batch, and once it's done fermenting, you can then dry hop with some other tropical hops to see how it comes out. So I think something like Simcoe or Strata or Cascade or like something really fruity and tropical would work really well with this. Something to note about Lactobacillus is that it can metabolize and eat longer chain sugars than regular Saccharomyces can, so like regular beer yeast. And what that means is it will help if you have a higher percentage of adjunct malts like wheat, oats, that sort of thing, because it adds the longer chain sugars. It just means that the beer will still have some body left in it, because if it was 100% barley, the beer would probably come out quite thin and maybe a bit too dry. So with a higher percentage of things like torrefied barley or wheat or something like that, it just means that there's some body left in the beer. The recipe is 3.75 kilograms of Maris Otter, 450 grams of flaked barley, and 200 grams of wheat. And that's it. As I say, no hops. The yeast we're using is Ebbegarden. It's a farmhouse kveik strain. Something else I'm actually doing today though is I'm doing a split batch. So on my system, it can handle up to 40 litres of wort into the fermenter. So I'm going to make 40 litres of wort and I'm going to split it. So I'm going to put 20 litres into one fermenter, and that's going to be my fast sour. And I've actually got a bacteria and yeast mix. It's a Belgian farmhouse blend, so it does have types of Saccharomyces in it, it's got types of Brettanomyces in it, and it's got types of Pedio in there as well. Those are the bugs to be a bit more scared of, but I have it set up in my brewery so that I can use these bugs. I've got a different cold side line for these kinds of wild ferments. And I would really recommend doing things like this, like doing a split batch. The reason being is you get to experiment a lot more, and like this is going to be like really fun to have like a sour which is ready like really quickly, and another one where I do actually have to wait like a year before I can try it. But you don't have to just do this with sours, you can try it with pale ales. So you can make one wort and then you can split it, and then you can try using different yeasts and then dry hopping with different hops, seeing how it comes out. Or you can even do something like make an IPA wort and ferment as a normal IPA, and then put like a farmhouse yeast or a saison yeast, like that sort of thing in the other, and have like a kind of hoppy saison. And it really helps you see the difference that different ingredients can have on a wort, and to just experiment round. And it also gives you a bit more diversity in your beers. I'm sure a lot of people out there are kind of like me, where when you drink beer, you like to have a different beer each time. You don't really want to sit there drinking bottle after bottle of the same beer. And it's nice to have a bit of variation. And this can really help with that. There are actually other things you can do to like take this a bit further, which I won't get into now, but you can do things like partigile brewing and that sort of thing. Let's have a look at how we got on. So I'm going to mash in. My mash temperature is 63 degrees. This thing here is a bleeder valve, and it just helps get the air out the pump, otherwise the pump starts cavitating. That's a lot of grain to put in. Oh, it looks really nice with the oats. I don't think my mash tun has been so full in a while. There's still more grains to come. One of the issues of using a grain bill with quite a high proportion of unfermentable grains is that it can get very gelatinous. And what that means is that in the mash tun, everything starts to stick together. So I've turned the pump on, and all the wort is being pulled out the bottom. And what that's doing is it's pulling all the grain down with it. And what that can do is it can compact the mash. And with loads of wheat, with loads of rolled oats, it just becomes very sticky and it sticks together. And then as I recirculate the mash through the pump, it starts to aerate the wort, which is something we don't really want at this time because it can lead to oxidation later on. I know there are debates online as to whether this really is an issue for home brewers. In my experience, actually, I found that when this has happened, my beers haven't become oxidized, but I still try and keep an eye out for it, especially as one of these beers I'm going to be leaving for a really long time, and the oxidized flavors tend to appear more and more over time. So in 6 months to a year, when I'm cracking open my first goose, it would be really upsetting if it tasted of wet cardboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the pump off, give the mash a stir and try and break up the clumps where it's stuck together. I'm then going to turn the pump on and have it circulate really slowly. It does mean that the beer probably won't be as clear as it normally would be, but I'm not too bothered because for a sour beer, having a nice haze is usually quite a nice thing. And also with the other beer, which I'm going to leave for a really long time, a lot of that haze is probably going to drop out. So I'm just doing the Sparge at the moment, and whilst I would normally collect maybe 30 litres for a 25 litre batch. I'm now collecting 45 litres for a 40 litre batch. As you can see, the wort has come out, it's probably a bit difficult to see on camera, but it's come out fairly clear. But you know, clarity isn't really an issue on sour beers so much. Now on the final boil, the interesting thing about this is that I've got no hops to sort out. So I'm still doing a 60-minute boil. There are many reasons to do a 60-minute boil other than to just get bitterness from the hops. So during the boil, you get something called Maillard reactions, which is when the sugars start to caramelize. And what that does is it gives the beer some color and it changes the flavor slightly. Also, boiling, of course, sterilizes the wort, so that by the time it goes into the fermenter, you know it's nice and clean, as in no bugs. And it's really interesting because if you were to do a 10 to 15 minute boil and compare the wort colour to a 60-minute boil, you would see a difference. I have done this brew before where I've done a 15-minute boil, and some people like to call that a raw ale, and it's technically speaking not a raw ale. Raw ale is something a bit different, but by only boiling it for 15 minutes, and it does work with this recipe, you get some really interesting grainy flavours. So my kettle is actually very full. It's not normally this full, as those who have watched previous videos have probably seen. What I do have to add to the boil though is my wort chiller and protofloc and nutrients for the kveik yeast. We're at the 15-minute mark now, so I'm going to put in my wort chiller. There it goes. And I'm going to put in 3 tablespoons of bread yeast for the nutrients for the kveik yeast. The Ebbegarden. Because it's a double batch, I'm going to put in 6 tablespoons of bread yeast. Okay, I'm just cooling the wort now, the boil's over. I'm trying to cool it down as quickly as possible, of course, but it's going to be interesting. It's been a really long time. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever actually boiled 45 litres of wort before. So it'll be interesting to see how long it takes to cool down, but what I'm going to do is when it gets to 35 degrees, I'm going to transfer 20 litres of it into a fermenter, and that's going to be the kveik batch. I'm then going to carry on cooling down the rest of it to 20 degrees, and then that's going to be the guza batch. I'm going to ferment my guza in a glass demijohn. This thing here. These aren't used so much in homebrewing anymore. There's a lot more popular options like stainless steel and even the plastic buckets. Plus there's like other like Fermentosaurus and Firmzilla and that sort of thing. Glass, it's very heavy. I wouldn't normally recommend a glass carboy. It's, as I say, it's heavy. It's kind of awkward to clean, especially when it's filled with beer. It can weigh really heavy amount. However, what they're really good for is keeping air out and for aging beer in. Anyway, I do need to give it a clean, so I'm going to get on with that now. So the wort has cooled down, perhaps a bit cooler than I would like. Got my first fermenter set up, so let me turn that on and drain out 20 litres. I'm letting it fall from a height so that it will aerate the wort. Okay, so I've got 20 litres of my Ebbegarden batch in here. All that's left to do is pitch my starter. I'm just shaking it up, making sure I've got all the yeast. Spray it, make sure everything's sanitised. Can never be too careful. Now to put in the fermentation chamber and ferment. Hopefully it will be ready in 5 days. Last time I made this beer it took 5 days. I think I've made it before a few times, and Ebbegarden takes about 5 days with a healthy fermentation. It took a while, but the temperature finally got almost cool enough, so I'm transferring the other batch. Okay, I've got to the end of brew day and I've pitched both yeast. I've got a gravity reading, and all that's left now to do is clean up. The Ebbegarden, as I say, should take 5 days, so I'll see you in 5 days to see how that's coming along. The other beer is going to be like a year or so I guess we'll see in a year what that's like. Fermentation has finished. It took 5 days, but Unfortunately, life got in the way, so this is probably about 10 days after fermentation, and it's tasting really good. It's like a nice sour tropical flavour, and I'm going to bottle this. In a previous video that we did, I made a kveik beer and put it into a keg and showed you how to fast carbonate it, but now with this kveik beer, I want to show you how to bottle condition it. So I'm going to bottle this. So I'm just going to get some bottles and bottle this. I've bottled the beers and it's got to the end of my brew day. So what I've done is I put the beers in the fermentation chamber with my beer that I'm fermenting at the moment. The beer that I'm fermenting at the moment, as I said, was a Ebbegarden kveik. And so it's fermenting at the same temperature that I want the bottles to condition at. And it should take about 3 days at this temperature for the bottles to carbonate and condition and be ready to drink. So I will see you in 3 days. It's been 3 days or so, and I've got my first bottle of the sour beer. The last time I made this was a couple years ago or so, so I'm really excited to be able to brew it again. It was just such a good beer, one of my favourite beers I've ever brewed. It's been about 3 days, conditioning at 33 degrees. I then put it in the fridge overnight to chill. Let's see what it's like. Oh, nice hiss. Shows that it's carbonated. So there, it's very hazy. There, you can see that. Very hazy, and it's kind of amber in colour. That's probably from the flake barley and wheat, so it would be like that. And also bacteria does tend to make beers go hazy. It's got a really nice like sour aroma. It's quite grainy as well. There's like quite a strong grainy aroma coming through. I'm getting some fruits, but the sourness is quite dominant. Oh, that's really good. Definitely getting that tropical fruit flavour, getting like a nice clean lactic sourness as well. Yeah, definitely getting mango, I'm definitely getting pineapple. And then on the finish, it's like a nice malty flavour, and that grainy flavour is coming through, and it's very complex yet very, very easy drinking. The mouthfeel is probably a medium mouthfeel, which suits the style well. Like, it's not heavy, but it's not too thin either. I think that maybe could have done with another day conditioning. It is carbonated, but it could be a bit more carbonated, I think. Maybe I didn't put enough priming sugar in it. So for 20 litres, I wanted to get a 2.4 carbonation level. I put 131 grams of sugar in. Maybe I got something a bit wrong there. Maybe it was, but it's still a really, really tasty beer that I'm really happy with. Like, we're in the middle of summer now, we've got another heat wave coming up, and I'm really glad I've got a few of these to drink as a nice refreshing beer to the hot weather. So there's a link below to the recipe pack so you can make it at home. And if you do, please comment below to let us know how you got on and how it came out for you, and if you did anything to change it, if you put any hops in right at the end of fermentation, or if you changed the malt bill at all. We'll be very interested to hear. Please, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, please subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.